In the sprawling, sun-dappled expanse of the Gir forest, a place where the ancient spirit of the wild still pulsed with untamed vigor, a scene unfolds that challenges the very nature of survival. A tiny lion cub, no bigger than a house cat, stumbles through the undergrowth, its mewling cries lost in the vastness of the Indian jungle. It's alone, vulnerable, a fragile spark of life in a world governed by tooth and claw. But it's what happens next, an intervention so unexpected, so profoundly moving, that will leave an indelible mark on this wilderness. An elephant, a creature of immense power and ancient wisdom, steps in, not as a threat, but as a protector against a danger far more insidious than any natural predator. Before we dive into this incredible true story of courage and unlikely compassion, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that kindness, in its purest form, can blossom even in the heart of the wild, hit that like button and subscribe for more astonishing moments from the natural world. The air in the Gir was thick with the scent of dry earth and unseen blossoms, a fragile peace hanging over the land. The lone lion cub, separated from its pride during a frantic chase initiated by a territorial male lion days earlier, was a heartbreaking sight. Its tawny fur, usually a perfect camouflage, now seemed to highlight its helplessness against the backdrop of towering teak trees and dense bamboo thickets. This was a place of breathtaking beauty, but also of relentless peril, especially for one so young and so utterly alone. The cub, driven by a primal instinct to find its mother, moved with a desperate, unsteady gait, its small body racked with hunger and fear. But something was about to shift in that palpable silence, a disturbance that would ripple through the ancient rhythms of the jungle. The great bull elephant, known to the local trackers as Rajendra, was a magnificent specimen of his kind. His tusks, though not the longest in the Gir, were thick and perfectly curved, instruments of both defense and delicate manipulation. His skin, a mosaic of gray and brown, bore the maps of countless journeys through this ancestral land, etched with the dust of dry riverbeds and the mud of monsoon wallows. Rajendra was usually a solitary creature, his days spent browsing the lush vegetation, his massive form a silent, moving mountain amidst the trees. He was a creature of routine, of immense power held in check by a generally placid temperament. He had seen many seasons come and go, witnessed the birth and death of countless creatures. But the plight of this specific, tiny predator was about to stir something deep within his ancient consciousness. The lion cub, barely old enough to be properly weaned, possessed none of the predatory confidence of its species. It was a bundle of soft fur, wide, terrified eyes, and a quivering nose that twitched, searching for a scent of safety that remained elusive. Its small paws padded uncertainly over the uneven ground, tripping over roots and stones, its high-pitched mews a desperate beacon in the overwhelming green and brown tapestry of the forest. The primary antagonist in this unfolding drama was not a rival predator, not a leopard lurking in the branches or a pack of hyenas sensing weakness. It was a far more cunning and relentless threat: human poachers. They moved through the forest like shadows, their presence a chilling whisper against the natural harmony. These men were driven by greed, their eyes set on the valuable parts of the animals that roamed free, be it ivory, skins, or bones for illicit markets. They were aware of the lion populations in Gir, and a lone cub, though not their primary target, could still represent an opportunity, or at least an easy mark to eliminate if it drew attention to their more significant activities. The environmental threat was the pervasive dryness of the pre-monsoon season. Water sources were shrinking, forcing animals into more concentrated areas, making them easier for predators and poachers to find. The cub's chances, already slim, were diminishing with every passing hour under the oppressive heat. A subtle sign of the poacher's proximity had already manifested, unnoticed by most, but perhaps not by Rajendra. Earlier that morning, a faint, unnatural metallic scent had drifted on the breeze, quickly dissipated but leaving a lingering unease in the air for those with senses keen enough to detect it. It was the smell of oiled steel, of human sweat mingled with the acrid tang of cheap tobacco, a scent entirely alien to the natural perfumes of the jungle. This was the first, almost imperceptible ripple of their encroaching presence. The Gir forest, a sanctuary for the last wild Asiatic lions, spread out in a rugged, undulating landscape of deciduous trees, thorny scrub, and open grassy patches. Rivers, now mostly sandy ribbons, snaked through the terrain, their banks lined with jamun and karanj trees that offered shade and sustenance. The sounds of the jungle were a complex symphony. The screech of langurs, the alarm calls of cheetal deer, the distant roar of a mature lion asserting its domain, and the constant thrum of insects. It was a world where every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig, held meaning. The foreshadowing of the imminent crisis was woven into the cub's naive vulnerability and the poacher's stealthy advance. The little feline, driven by desperation, was moving with less caution than it should, its cries potentially attracting unwanted attention from multiple quarters. The poachers, meanwhile, were known to use the cover of midday, when animal activity lessened and ranger patrols might be scarcer, to scout or lay their snares. Rajendra, who had been foraging near a sparse patch of bamboo, had grown unusually still, his great ears fanning out, his trunk held aloft, testing the wind currents. He wasn't focused on food anymore. His attention was directed towards the subtle, discordant notes that had begun to infiltrate the forest harmony, and perhaps, towards the plaintive cries of the lost cub that echoed faintly through the trees. The inciting incident occurred with a chilling swiftness. The poachers, 3 of them, materialized from the dense undergrowth, their movements practiced and silent. They had been tracking a small group of deer, but the sight of the lone lion cub, exposed and struggling near a dried-up stream bed, was an unexpected, and to them, insignificant diversion. One of the men, perhaps seeing it as a potential nuisance or simply out of casual cruelty, raised a heavy wooden stick. The cub, startled by their sudden appearance, froze, its small body trembling, its earlier mews replaced by a terrified silence. It was this moment of direct, imminent threat to the cub that acted as the catalyst. The men were less than 20 yards away, their intentions, even if not immediately lethal towards the cub, were clearly hostile to the sanctity of the wildlife. This sudden crisis was directly linked to the earlier foreshadowing. The cub's desperate, less cautious movements had led it into this open, vulnerable position. The poachers, operating with their usual stealth, had stumbled upon it precisely because it was isolated and making noise. Rajendra, the elephant, had been subtly tracking these discordant elements for some time. From his vantage point, partially obscured by a cluster of sal trees, he had observed the poacher's approach. His massive body, which had been swaying gently as he processed the scents and sounds, now became utterly still. His deep-set eyes, usually calm and thoughtful, fixed on the men and the tiny, terrified creature before them. The initial reaction from the cub was pure, unadulterated fear. It tried to press itself flatter against the ground, its tawny fur blending imperfectly with the dry leaves. The poachers exchanged a few low words, their expressions indifferent. Rajendra's first, almost imperceptible intervention was not a charge, not a trumpet of aggression. It was a shift in his immense presence. He took a single, deliberate step forward, breaking a large, dry branch underfoot with an audible crack that echoed through the stillness. It wasn't a direct challenge, not yet, but it was a clear announcement of his presence, a sound designed to make the intruders pause. One of the poachers glanced up, startled, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. He saw nothing but the wall of green and brown, the elephant still mostly concealed. He dismissed the sound as a falling branch, turning his attention back to the cub, perhaps annoyed by the interruption. This was the first minor conflict, a test of the poacher's awareness and the elephant's resolve. The poachers had momentarily been distracted, but their focus quickly returned to the small, vulnerable creature at their feet, while Rajendra watched, his great mind processing the unfolding scene with a growing sense of disquiet. The tension in the clearing began to escalate, each passing second stretching taut like a drawn bowstring. The poachers, having briefly dismissed the sound of the breaking branch, began to move with more purpose towards the lion cub. One of them prodded dismissively in its direction with a stick, not quite striking it, but clearly asserting dominance and intent. The cub flinched violently, letting out a distressed, high-pitched yelp that cut through the humid air. This small, desperate sound seemed to hang in the atmosphere, a palpable signal of distress. Rajendra, still partially hidden, responded with a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, a sound more felt than heard. It was a deeper, more resonant warning this time, a clear indication that something large and powerful was nearby and displeased. The men paused again, their heads snapping up, eyes darting nervously towards the source of the unsettling vibration. They still couldn't pinpoint its origin, the dense foliage providing perfect cover for the colossal elephant. Rajendra began to employ his incredible senses, his trunk raised high, sifting through the complex tapestry of scents. He could smell the acrid fear emanating from the tiny cub, the oily, metallic scent of the poachers' weapons, their sweat, and the faint, lingering odor of tobacco. His large ears, like sensitive radar dishes, swiveled, capturing the hushed whispers of the men, the rustle of their clothing, the soft thud of their footsteps on the dry earth. He could also hear the frantic, shallow breathing of the cub. Through the gaps in the leaves, his keen eyes registered every movement, the poachers' shifty glances, the way they held their crude weapons, the cub's attempts to make itself smaller, to disappear. The poachers, in turn, were trying to locate the source of the ominous sound. One of them, bolder or perhaps more foolish than the others, took a few tentative steps towards the dense thicket where Rajendra stood concealed, peering into the shadows. He saw nothing but an impenetrable wall of vegetation and quickly retreated, unnerved. The situation was a delicate balance of near misses and mounting pressure. The cub, in a renewed burst of desperate energy, scrambled a few feet away, trying to find refuge beneath a thorny ziziphus bush. This bought it a few precious seconds, but the poachers, now more alert to the possibility of a larger animal nearby, seemed determined to deal with the cub quickly, perhaps fearing it would attract its mother or other predators. The elephant, for his part, was making subtle moves, shifting his weight, causing leaves to rustle high in the canopy, creating an impression of movement all around them, a psychological tactic to unsettle the intruders. The heat of the midday sun beat down relentlessly, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The cicadas, which had fallen silent at the poachers' arrival, slowly began their deafening chorus again, a jarring soundtrack to the unfolding drama. The personal stakes for Rajendra seemed to deepen with every passing moment. While elephants are not typically protectors of feline predators, there are documented instances of unusual interspecies altruism in the wild. Perhaps the cub's extreme vulnerability, its sheer helplessness, triggered a protective instinct that transcended typical species boundaries. Or perhaps it was simply an intolerance for the unnatural, cruel intrusion of the poachers into his domain. His breathing grew heavier, a slow, deliberate huffing sound that was barely audible but spoke of contained power. For the cub, every second was a terrifying gamble for survival. Its internal world was a storm of fear, hunger, and a desperate yearning for its mother's presence. The poachers, now growing visibly more agitated by the unseen presence and the cub's continued evasion, were becoming less cautious, their movements more aggressive. The danger drew palpably closer. One of the poachers, frustrated, lunged towards the ziziphus bush, thrashing at it with his stick to flush the cub out. The thorny branches offered little protection, and the cub, with another cry of terror, darted out from the other side, momentarily exposed in a small clearing. This was the moment the poachers had been waiting for, their attention now fully focused on the small, fleeing target. It was also the moment Rajendra decided that subtle warnings were no longer sufficient. As one of the poachers raised his stick to strike at the exposed cub, a deafening, explosive sound ripped through the jungle air. It was not a gunshot, but the sound of a large tree limb, thick as a man's thigh, being snapped with incredible force. Rajendra, still mostly unseen, had reached out with his powerful trunk and broken it, the crack like a rifle shot. Simultaneously, he let out a short, sharp trumpet, a blast of sound that was pure, unadulterated warning. The poachers froze mid-action, their faces paling, the stick clattering to the ground. The cub, startled by the new, even louder sound, stumbled and fell, lying panting on the dusty earth. The morale of the poachers, who had perhaps felt in control moments before, plummeted. They were no longer dealing with a potentially lost fawn or a stray piglet. The signs pointed to something far larger and far more dangerous. The air crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Rajendra then took another deliberate step, and then another, his massive form beginning to emerge from the shadows, his trunk swinging purposefully, ready to act. The game changed irrevocably the instant Rajendra fully revealed himself. He didn't charge immediately. Instead, he stepped out from the cover of the sal trees with a silent, deliberate majesty that was far more terrifying than a sudden rush. His sheer size was overwhelming, a mountain of muscle and bone, his shadow falling over the poachers and the tiny cub. His ears were now fully flared, making him appear even larger, a classic display of agitation and warning in elephants. His tusks gleamed dully in the filtered sunlight, and his deep-set eyes, small in his massive head, were fixed intently on the three men. The poachers, who had been focused on the small, vulnerable cub, were now confronted with a creature that could crush them without a second thought. Their bravado evaporated like mist in the sun, replaced by a primal, instinctual fear. The pressure was immense, the seconds ticking by with agonizing slowness. The cub lay frozen between the elephant and the poachers, a tiny pawn in a high-stakes standoff. The poachers, armed only with sticks and perhaps a concealed knife, were hopelessly outmatched. One of them instinctively took a step back, then another, his eyes wide with terror. The others remained rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the silent, colossal figure before them. There was a brief, terrifying moment where it seemed the poachers might do something foolish out of sheer panic, perhaps shout, or throw a stone, an action that could have provoked a devastating response from Rajendra. The elephant, however, remained surprisingly calm, his power radiating not from aggression, but from an immense, unwavering resolve. He was a living embodiment of the jungle's ancient strength, a guardian awakened. Rajendra's tactical planning, if one could call the instinctual brilliance of such a creature that, was masterful. He didn't need to roar or trumpet again immediately. His presence alone was a weapon. He shifted his weight slightly, his massive feet making the ground tremble. He took another slow, measured step towards the poachers, closing the distance, his trunk now held slightly curled, ready to uncoil with lightning speed. He was not just protecting the cub, he was reclaiming this patch of jungle from the intruders, asserting his dominance and the natural order. The poachers understood. The silent, relentless advance of the elephant was more unnerving than a furious charge would have been. It spoke of calculated intent, of an intelligence that recognized them as a threat that needed to be neutralized, not merely scared away. The ramp up to the inevitable confrontation was palpable. The jungle itself seemed to hold its breath. The chirping of insects ceased. The birds fell silent. The only sounds were the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the elephant, the sharp, fearful gasps of the poachers, and the almost inaudible whimpers of the terrified lion cub. The men knew they had to retreat, but fear had momentarily paralyzed them. Rajendra took one more step, and that was the catalyst that finally broke their paralysis. The climactic confrontation exploded with a primal fury that shook the very foundations of the jungle. As the poachers, finally breaking free from their fear-induced paralysis, turned to flee, Rajendra let out a deafening, earth-shattering trumpet blast. It was a sound of immense power and righteous anger, a declaration of war against those who would defile his sanctuary and harm its inhabitants. The air itself vibrated with the intensity of the sound. Dust and dry leaves billowed up from the ground as he took his first powerful stride towards the fleeing men. His massive head, with its formidable tusks, was lowered slightly, a clear sign of his aggressive intent. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of adrenaline, from both the terrified poachers and the enraged elephant. The filtered sunlight through the canopy cast long, dancing shadows, making the scene even more chaotic and terrifying. The ensuing moments were a terrifying display of the elephant's raw power. He didn't need to make physical contact with the poachers to convey the lethality of his threat. He moved with surprising speed and agility for a creature of his size, his huge feet pounding the earth, each step a thunderous boom. He smashed through the undergrowth as if it were paper, small trees and bushes bending and snapping in his wake. He kicked up clouds of dust and debris, creating a screen that further disoriented the fleeing men. One of the poachers stumbled and fell, his cry of terror swallowed by the elephant's furious trumpeting. Rajendra, however, was not intent on killing them, but on driving them out, on teaching them a lesson they would never forget. He veered slightly, giving the fallen man a chance to scramble to his feet and continue his desperate flight, but not without passing terrifyingly close, the wind of his passage ruffling the man's hair. The elephant tore down a substantial branch from a nearby tree with his trunk and hurled it in the direction of the poachers, the projectile crashing through the foliage with frightening force, landing just yards behind them. Rajendra's struggle was not against an equal adversary, but against the violation of his world. His physical exertion was evident in the heaving of his massive flanks, the steam snorting from his trunk, the focused intensity in his eyes. This was not a playful mock charge. This was a creature pushed to its limit, responding with the full force of its protective instincts. He pursued the poachers for several hundred yards, a relentless, terrifying engine of destruction, ensuring they were not just scared, but thoroughly routed from the area. The sounds of their panicked shouts and crashing through the undergrowth grew fainter and fainter, until finally, there was only the sound of the elephant's heavy breathing and the rustling of leaves as he slowed his pursuit. The triumph was absolute. Rajendra stood at the edge of the denser part of the jungle, his great body trembling slightly from the adrenaline and exertion, his ears still flared, his trunk testing the air. He listened intently, ensuring the poachers were truly gone, their scent, and sounds receding into the distance until they vanished completely. Then, a profound silence descended, broken only by the distant cawing of a crow. He turned slowly, his earlier fury replaced by a watchful calm, and began to walk back towards the clearing where the lion cub lay. The decisive turning point had been reached. The immediate, man-made threat had been utterly and decisively neutralized. The poachers were gone, their nefarious intentions thwarted by the unexpected and awe-inspiring intervention of this gentle giant turned fierce protector. The jungle could breathe again, and for one tiny lion cub, the world had just been granted a new, precious lease on life. The immediate emotional aftermath in the now quiet clearing was thick with a strange, poignant stillness. Rajendra walked slowly back to where the lion cub lay, his massive footsteps surprisingly gentle on the dry earth. The cub, which had remained frozen in terror throughout the tumultuous chase, was still pressed flat against the ground, its tiny body trembling. It watched the approaching elephant with wide, unblinking eyes, too exhausted and frightened to even attempt to flee. Rajendra stopped a few feet away, his immense form casting a comforting shadow over the small feline. He lowered his great head, his trunk uncurling slowly, cautiously. He extended the sensitive tip towards the cub, his movements incredibly delicate for such a powerful appendage. He gently touched the cub's flank, a feathery light caress, as if to reassure it, or perhaps to check if it was unharmed. The cub flinched almost imperceptibly at the contact, but did not pull away. There was no aggression in the elephant's touch, only a profound, quiet concern. Rangers, alerted by the distant, unmistakable sounds of an agitated elephant and eventually discovering the poachers' hastily abandoned tracks leading out of the park, would later piece together parts of the extraordinary encounter, increasing patrols in this sector as a precaution. Their investigation would confirm the presence of poachers and the signs of a massive elephant's protective intervention near the spot where the cub was last seen by the fleeing men, though the full truth of Rajendra's actions would remain a legend whispered among them. The interaction between the giant and the tiny predator was a moment suspended in time. After the initial gentle touch, Rajendra simply stood there, a silent, steadfast guardian. The cub, gradually sensing that the immediate danger had passed and that this colossal creature meant it no harm, slowly lifted its head. It let out a soft, almost inaudible mewl, a sound not of terror, but of utter exhaustion and perhaps a dawning, bewildered sense of security. The elephant responded with a low, gentle rumble deep in its chest, a sound of reassurance that vibrated through the ground. For a long moment, they remained like that, the great bull elephant and the tiny lion cub, an impossible tableau of interspecies connection in the heart of the wild. The cub, emboldened by the elephant's calm presence, eventually uncurled its small body and, after a moment's hesitation, took a few wobbly steps closer to the elephant's massive foreleg, as if seeking shelter beside a living mountain. The hint of ongoing healing was fragile but present. The cub was still alone, its long-term survival far from certain. But Rajendra's intervention had bought it precious time, a chance. The elephant remained near the cub for a while longer, a silent sentinel, his presence deterring any other potential threats that might have been drawn by the earlier commotion. He browsed absently on some nearby leaves, but his attention remained largely focused on the small creature resting near his feet. The jungle, which had been a place of terror for the cub, now felt, for a brief interlude, like a sanctuary, presided over by an unlikely guardian. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Rajendra seemed to sense that his duty, for now, was done. He gave the cub one last, lingering look, a soft rumble emanating from his chest, before turning slowly and deliberately, and beginning to move away, his massive form disappearing soundlessly back into the dense foliage from which he had emerged. The lion cub watched him go. Then, as if finally succumbing to its exhaustion and the newfound sense of safety, it curled up at the base of a large tree, the one near where the elephant had stood, and fell into a deep sleep. The jungle, too, seemed to exhale, the sounds of its myriad inhabitants slowly returning, weaving a tapestry of renewed normalcy. But it was a normalcy subtly changed, forever imprinted with the memory of an elephant's extraordinary courage and an impossible act of compassion. And then, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a profound and peaceful silence returned to that small patch of the Gir wilderness. Thanks for watching. If this story of an elephant's incredible bravery and an unlikely bond touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe for more wild moments of wonder that remind us of the deep connections within the natural world.